Good evening from Vietnam. Good afternoon to you, Almendra. Thanks a lot for spending your beautiful afternoon to join our program and sharing your amazing journey, your stories, your wisdom to our audience around the world on behalf of the listener. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for listening and for being here.
And you have a new family, you have a new and two new friends, Vivian and Ha from Vietnam, right? So if you travel to this country, know who to call. We would love to have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and take you around to show you how beautiful our people and the culture here. Okay?
Good. I look forward to putting that on my wish list. I think I have a wish list, and over the years I add things to it, and they happen. So I'm going to be adding it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I make sure I will also put that into my wish list also to make sure that you will come. So we have
Thank
two
you.
wishes at the same time for one thing.
Excellent.
Amandra, in our culture, for your little taste about culture, it's very honor for our audience if we can have you to share a little bit about who you are and the work you do. Would you please do that for us?
Absolutely, my pleasure. So my name is Almendra Staffa-Healey. My name is a Spanish name, except that it's not a name that is given to people normally. It means almond, and I was named after the almond blossoms because I was born in February, which is when they are in bloom. And my parents are originally from New York, but they moved to Spain in the 1970s, and they fell in love with the south of Spain, and so I was born there. And so I grew up between the United States and Spain. That was kind of my childhood, my teenagehood. And when I started to think about what it was I wanted to do from a very early age, I really wanted to help people learn about cultural differences. When I was about 15, I was living in Miami, and I created an after-school program at a local school in which we were going to combine art and learning about other cultures. What I didn't realize was how long art projects take. And so we only really did something with paper mache and the Chinese New Year, and we actually did that for like 3 months. So I didn't really get to explore many cultures. We only did one. So we started in February, and we were done in May with a beautiful paper mache dragon head. But I knew that I wanted to combine learning about other places and other people and seeing different perspectives. So I kind of have a circuitous studies. I did lots of different things. I studied art history. I studied education. I studied business administration. I studied anthropology. Lots of different things. Really just trying to figure out, who are we? What are humans? What are we here for, and why are we different and similar? And so I've been working as an intercultural trainer. I'm a coach, and I help people usually with intercultural coaching, although I do other types of coaching as well. And coaching is about achieving your goals, and achieving them in the ways that are meaningful to you. And we don't all want the same things, and we don't all want to get the same things or be the same things. So really listening and accompanying. And then also figuring out ways in which those things that we no longer need, how to let go of them, and how to release ourselves from programmings and maybe cultural patterns that we inherited that actually keep us back from being the beings that we actually want to be. And so I'm committed to really helping also, especially young people. I've been working in higher education with university students for the last 25 years, and really sort of helping youth find ways to turn into the people that they want to be, and to really bring hope to our lives. So I'm multi-curious. I like to do a lot of different things, and I have multiple projects going on at all times. But I think ultimately it's I'm here to help people figure out who they want to be, how they want to be it, and getting to know themselves and releasing the things that they don't want anymore. so that they can really be themselves. So that's what I do. Yeah.
For my many years of reading, of learning, this is the first time I heard the word multi-curious. And as a founder of New Hello Newness, we always enjoy something new along the horizon of learning to sharing. So multi-curious, and we always remember that from now on. It's coming from you. And before we come back to time travel, let's time travel before you were born a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Because I'm curious to know. I think that with your parents moving from New York to Spain, that set the stone for Almendra to have a journey lately. So
Yeah.
let's give some, like story about them, why they travel around the world, like to Spain and decided to stay there instead of, be in the States.
So I think it goes back to my grandmother. It goes back to my grandmother. It goes back to my grandfather on my mother's side. Um, they they sort of looked at things differently. They lived in my grandmother was born in the 20s, as was my grandfather. My grandfather was a pilot in the Second World War. And my grandmother grew up in a family in New York City, but they they kind of did things to a certain degree the way things were supposed to be, but also incorporating newness into their lives. And they separated when my mother was young. My mother was 8 when they divorced, and so each of them kind of went into their own roots. But what happened was with my mother and my father, they got married very young. I mean, very young for our current day and age. My mother was 18 and my father was 19. And they actually wanted to live in Europe. They wanted to maybe live in Italy, maybe live in Spain. My mother is an artist, my father's a writer. And they were really young at that time. And so they went to Italy, they went to Spain. My family's on my mother's side, they were in the wine business, and so they took wines from Spain and they imported them into the United States. And so there was a family business that could allow them to be here. And they found this tiny little village in the south of Spain. My mother had a little bit of money and she bought a house with my father for $4,000 at the time, which was, which was money, but in comparison to the United States, it wasn't. And and so they decided to sort of live there, which has been kind of a part of my upbringing. It's not, you don't necessarily travel places, you live places. So I learned that through the experience with my mother, because my parents separated when I was 2. But there was a lot of travel, and not travel just for tourism, but travel for actually getting to know what is this place, who are the people, and making connections. So my parents they're creative people. There's also, in the case of my mother, a great sort of quest for spirituality and for finding out more about consciousness. And and so I grew up I grew up with parents who were creating new things, creating new ways of doing things, and sort of stepping outside of the tradition as well, sort of following their own parents, and within the system, but also outside of the system. So that's
Picking up the creativity within your DNA, put it that way, right? And you could, when you grow up, between different cultures from America, from Europe, then you could have, think of anything that you could dream of doing, so many different things, be a journalist, be an artist, be a businessman, be a writer, be an author, or whatever, right? Why is that intercultural becoming something that really interested that little Amandra when she was little?
Yeah. So I think for me, Because I grew up between cultures, there was sort of a naturalness to being curious about why people do things the way they do, and what is all this diversity about, and trying to learn more about it. I Part of it also was I did what was easy. I spoke English, I spoke Spanish, and so I started out as a Spanish teacher and an art teacher in New York City at a public high school. But what I really wanted to do was teach people about culture. And so we explored Spanish culture, but in the process, as you learn about another culture, you end up learning about your own and culture and your identity. And so for me, there was a big piece in sort of when I was younger, not really feeling like I belonged anywhere. I was kind of in between cultures. And as I grew up, trying to figure out, okay, if I am in between cultures, how can I have an identity? Because I'm not just Spanish, I'm not just US American, I'm this other, and then I learned it was called third culture kids, right? There's a term for children who grow up between cultures, and you can feel like you don't belong anywhere, or you can work on feeling like you belong everywhere. And that's what I started to work on. And so the intercultural field for me is a way to help people that feel like they belong everywhere. And you do that by learning about yourself and, what is my history? Thank you for asking about my parents, and then going into, who are my ancestors? Like, how did I get here? Because we're losing stories, right? We lose stories, and so it's important to remind ourselves and to see, okay, so how did I get to be here at this time, right? So for me, their story, my story, and sort of learning about, where do I come from, and why do I believe what I believe, and why do other people believe what they believe, what was behind that. So there's the family history, there's the regional history, the national history. There's things with regards to identity as a male, a female, non-binary. I mean, there's so many identities. And so part of my work has been to sort of figure out, okay, so how do I feel comfortable in my identity, and how can I help other people do that as well? And so that's really what brought me to the intercultural field, trying to help people to feel like they belonged, because I didn't at first.
When you talk about that, I can feel that a very curious Amendra at young age, asking a lot of questions, and a lot of questions that you asked back then. I don't think that there's a lot of answers available out there also, right? So tell us a typical day, a typical, environment that Amendra when she was little, how will she associate with friends, with the people in her life?
Okay, so I changed schools a lot.
Ah,
I changed schools about every year and a half, and between Spain and the United States. So I was new a lot of the time, in the places where I was. And so typical days, I mean, I loved school. School for me was an environment where I could sort of, there was a routine, there was a structure. It was nice. It's nice to have a structure until you no longer need it, right? But for me, because I kept going to a new place, I needed a structure. And so I'd try and figure out, okay, so how does this work? Where am I? How does it work? What do you do? But one of the things that I realized was that I didn't like superficiality. I liked going deep, so I'd very quickly make very strong friendships with people. And so I guess a typical day was, going to school and making the most of that. I think because I changed school systems so much, I had to learn how to teach myself as well. So being in school, I would repeat what the teacher said to myself. So I would have a running dialogue of repeating the words. That was part of the way I sort of was present wherever it was that I was. And then I found out, what do people do here? Like, what do you do? And so I'd make friends and I'd go out and I'd do whatever it was that people did there, because in about, a month, in some months, I knew I'd be leaving again. So I needed to experience that. So I just kind of took advantage. So I was like a typical everything in each of the places where I was, so that I could
Uh-huh.
really fit in quickly, and then I'd leave, and so I'd have to learn how to be the next typical whatever it was, and take that with me. Yeah.
So when you were young and you talk about culture differences to your friends, right? Because you hang out a lot with your friends compared to other people, I think. So how typically they respond to those stories that little Almendra was sharing?
It varies. I think when I was little, we didn't have that strong a sense of culture. It was more, what we liked, what we didn't like. But I do remember my best friend, growing up. One of my best friends growing up, she was French, and her mother was English. And we were in the south of Spain, in the village where my parents originally moved to. And there was a moment where I think we had been playing, in the town square, and we were returning home, and somehow we had made some kind of a plan, and I wasn't going to be able to keep it anymore. And so I said to her, I remember we were walking down the hill, and I said, "No, I'm sorry." And she turned and she looked at me and she said, "You Americans, you're always saying you're sorry, but you don't mean it." And I went, "Oh, okay. So we have now a cultural difference here, because she's French, and I guess, you say sorry in French when you actually mean it. Otherwise, you don't say it." And so there were things that came up, and it was spontaneous, and things around simple things like food, or cultural traditions. When you go somewhere new, and I would have friends who perhaps were Jewish, and I grew up in Spain, which is mostly a Catholic country, and so I'd learn about their traditions, and it was always coming up. I think maybe I was aware of it because of the moving around, but for other
Mm.
people, I was always curious. My group of friends were from many different religious backgrounds. I even had friends from Orthodox Russian, backgrounds as well, and so I learned about their traditions, and I don't know, it was fun to compare. It was that's what I liked. Yeah.
Wow. So from being curious to find the answer for yourself, to understand about your identity, to understand about who you are, and then to understand the bigger picture of what is human, right? I write a note in here, what is human? Who are we, right? And then you start to figure out that your curiosity not only can help you answering those questions, but can also turn out to become something that you can help other people doing that also. So since when you realize that could become something that you can invest time and effort to become to work on?
Yeah. So when I moved back to Spain in 1999, from New York, and that was the first time I feel like I actually made the choice myself as to where it was I wanted to live. And so I moved to Madrid, and I've actually been living in Madrid since 1999. So it's 25 years now, almost 20, well, 26. Um, and I started working for a language school that had a program where students from U.S. universities would go, and they'd spend a number of months, and they'd study there the Spanish language, Spanish culture, and in the process of working with them, I asked them to journal, to keep a journal, and to start observing things around them that they were curious about, or things around them that were different, that perhaps they didn't expect. And I would have one-on-one meetings with these students, and I'd read what they had written, or they'd tell me about what it was that they were journaling about. And then at a certain point, I would have everyone come together and they would all share what it was that they were looking at. But at the beginning, it was very wide. Be curious about everything. And then as they started to experience living where they were, I'd say, okay, well, out of all of these things that you're observing, what's one thing that you really want to focus attention on? And so then I'd have them do a little bit of research or talk to people or practice it. And then we'd come together and each person would share the one thing that they had become a little bit more specialized in. And so I remember I had one student who came, I can't remember where in the United States she was from, but she had never seen public transportation. And she was fascinated by the public transportation system in Spain, in Madrid specifically, the metro and the buses. And she started to observe how in the metro, when you take the escalators going up, if you're not walking up the stairs, you stand on the right. And people who want to walk up the stairs stand on the left and they walk up. She noticed how for the buses, at the bus stop, there was a line of people and you would get on the line, and some people would get really upset if you jumped the line. But in other places, it didn't really matter if you jumped the line. But somehow in public transportation, that was like so she learned to see different patterns and behaviors. And each of my students were doing that. They were learning to see different patterns and behaviors and things that maybe you could not necessarily create a system to understand it, but certainly see certain things that were consistent over time, which gave you the ability to sort of figure out, okay, well, maybe things work like this. And so then they shared amongst themselves, because they also spoke outside of that, they also had to speak with other Spanish people and check, is your hypothesis right? Is what you're thinking, this is a pattern? You got to double check with somebody who's from here and make sure, that you're not imagining it. And then they'd come back in and they'd all share. So this was the beginning. I felt like I had invented it. And then later on in life, I learned that there was an intercultural studies field, and I trained myself as well in that. But at the time, that was kind of my way of looking at cultural differences and understanding them. And that has really shaped how I continue to work with my clients. It's like, okay, so you're in a new country. What are you seeing? Like, what's standing out to you? And then I did become really formally trained in the intercultural field, and I became what is called an IDI qualified administrator. The IDI is the Intercultural Development Inventory, which is a tool that assesses your intercultural competency. And so I use this. So now I bring in tools and assessments and things so that we can have a common language, because for intercultural work, we need to be able to talk a similar language so that we can understand, what differences we're seeing. And so it's a constant sort of coming and going between difference and similarity. So if we're seeing this differently, how do you see it differently? How can we talk about that difference in a way that we actually understand each other? Because we have that similar language, I guess, or similar vocabulary. Yeah.
About 14 years ago when I came back to Vietnam, right? And back then, there's a lot of foreigners also coming to Vietnam because our country has been developing. So my boss asked me to do a Vietnam like workshop to welcome people. So I think it's very basic of intercultural exchange and stuff like that. I think that there's a lot of people who listen to this conversation. We want to know the aha moment, not turning. Okay, because earlier you said that you don't want to understand at the surface, but then drive into deeper to understand further, right? And a lot of us let our curiosity just stand in the surface of observing, of seeing things, of noticing good things, maybe something there, but would not move into the next stage. Okay. Yeah. And I want to bring you to the aha moment that you say, okay, for this, maybe I will need to invest time and resources to know more and make myself an expert so that individuals, organizations can come to me for my expertise to help that people to get, take advantage, no, should I say that take advantage? Maybe take, the knowledge of culture differences becoming something that a strength for themselves in the corporate world, in life also. So what made you do that, Amendra?
Um, I think it was coincidence or serendipity, or I don't know. I mean, it was just a couple of things happened at the same time for me. I think I was in my mid-30s, and I was sitting on a park bench with my aunt, with my father's sister. She had come from New York to visit, and she turned to me and she said, "You know, you're a third culture kid." And before that, I did not know that that was my culture. And so I said, "What do you mean?" And so she explained it to me. And then there's a book, fantastic book by Ruth Van Recken and David Pollock called Third Culture Kids Growing Up Between Worlds. And at that same time, one of the associations that I'm a part of was looking at sort of intercultural trainings. So working in study abroad with students and exchanges, learning more about cultural differences and how to help our students who are coming from other places navigate those. And so I did a training course, and it just sort of happened all at the same time. It just sort of all came within the period of a year. And then I learned about the Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication, which was an event that took place every summer where people from all over the world would join together, and there would be these courses. And so I went and I did a course, and then I learned about a methodology called personal leadership, which is really a technique to help you to sort of figure out your relationship with cultural difference. And that was the thing. It's like, oh, so what's my relationship with it? And so when you arrive in a new country, or if your company has sent you somewhere else, that's kind of the question. What's your relationship with this new culture that you're in? Is it going to stay superficial? When does it become important to you to actually learn more about where you are and how you figure out how you relate to that, your emotions with it? Because I could every year I go somewhere for work, and I sort of look at, what are the cultural values of this place that I'm going to, because I'm probably going to see something that might strike me as different or surprise me, and I want to know where that comes from. And so when I'm working with people, I'm looking at that curiosity, but it's a question of, what is your relationship to this place? How meaningful do you want it to be? And if you do, then I'm going to work with you. And I think sometimes you can stay on the superficial level. But if that moment comes up for you where it's like, oh, actually, this is important, that's the time that I come in and I help you to go deeper. No, I think each of us are in different places when it comes to cultural differences. For some of us, we may need to know more. For some of us, we may not need to know more. But I encourage people always to explore their relationship with where they are. And there's a piece in this which there's like you almost need an awakening to cultural difference. It's like suddenly you like go, oh wait, I need to know more about that. You sort of become more sensitive. And in that process, that's where I can start working with you. It's like, oh, I have this group of people and there's this issue that comes up. Okay, so now you're sensitive to it. Now we can actually do something. And so because in my work, what I know is that there's a lot of stuff that I can learn up here in my head, But until I need to use it, or until I need to sort of use my emotions with it, it doesn't translate into action. So I can know a lot about theory and culture, but if I don't have to use it, then I don't. It's so that's why, it's like, how important is what's the relationship that you want to have with the people here, or the culture? Yeah.
So it means like, if I look at my understanding, it's like me here, and the culture is like Vivian, my wife, right? If I'm having a good relationship of understanding about my wife, then I will open
Yeah.
the bridge to connect with her and to understand her from all angles, right? And to have the curiosity of knowing also about that. So I bet that is the easy understanding for people outside of your expertise to understand about the relationship of us and the cultural differences, right? So I think that the world is now very connecting. Like if we speak about the world 20 years ago, it's large, and when you were young, you travel from Spain and New York, America and Spain, and you don't see the world different big anymore. But now I think the world is getting very, very integrated. It's easy for us to talk to people from other countries. So if I want to build that, love for relationship of culture, what baby steps should I take, Amanda?
So my children, my son is almost 19, my daughter is 16. She just turned 16 at the end of August. And they have a lot more in common with people their age around the world than they might have actually with their own national culture. Because of globalization, they can relate really easily to people on the other side of the planet. There's similar tastes, there's similar things in music, everybody knows what's happening in their age group around the world. And so it depends on the age group, I think, also, that I'm working with. I think there are generational differences that shape, how old are you and where are you going? And how much do you want to learn about cultural differences, and how, because with globalization, you can find commonality everywhere now. For me, in the work that I've been doing over the years, there's different levels of intercultural competency, and there's one in which, when I enter into a new space, what I'm trying to figure out is which is better and which is worse. This is the strategy, which we can call polarization, and I can think of my culture as being better, in which case I will be in defense, or I can think of your culture as being better, and so then I'll be in reversal. And this is a way for me to make sense of things, because I need some kind of information, and I want to do it through judgment, but that's really exhausting. And what I found over the years is that we're moving much more towards looking for what we have in common, those similarities. And so when we start to do that, though, we don't see the difference, because we're really just trying to be more comfortable with each other. And, what music do you listen to? Oh, I listen to that same music. It's the similarity principle, where you're minimizing differences. And that can be an okay space, but then you don't see the richness. You don't see the richness of the diversity. You sort of stay on that superficial level, and it's very easy to move in that space. But something happens in that, in which there are certain differences that make a difference. There are differences that are important to you. And so when you come to a new culture, if there are traditions, or if there are ways of thinking, if there are different ways of communicating, if you can see those and they still exist, it's because they are important to the local culture. And so then I need to actually move towards discomfort. I need to move out of what is comfortable, and I need to find the challenge. Okay, so why, certain countries, people touch each other when they talk. and some don't. And how comfortable am I with that? You know, it's like, uh-oh. And what does it mean if I don't touch the other person when, you know, is that going to come off as disrespectful? What if I step back instead of maintaining close proximity? And so in the work that I do, there's this sort of, you know, when does it, like, there's a moment where it's like, okay, there is a difference here that I'm seeing that needs to be looked at. Because it's important to the other person, and maybe it's also, or maybe I have a difference that I need you to see. And so then I start moving into this space of, you know, actually I am going to correct you. I'm going to challenge you, as opposed to just maintain it. Oh, it's just fine. No, it's not. It's not fine anymore. I need you to know this about me. And, you know, actually when you touch me, I'm a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm working on it. So there's, you know, ways of bridging that I try and explore as well.
You think in the future, maybe not in the next 20 years, but 50 years, 100 years, there will be a universal culture that might be applied everywhere around the world if the next generation will keep coming up with a new way of, you know, like eliminate the old culture and using the thing that may be easier to exchange between culture to one country to one culture to the next?
That's a good question. So my definition of culture is larger than nations, right? So my definition of culture at this point takes into account a lot of different things, including learning styles. We have preferences as to how we learn. Some people, you know, like to do things to learn. There's other people that like to watch things to learn. There's other people who like to think things to learn. And then there's other people who like to experiment things to learn. And so I think so long as we learn in different ways, and, you know, that brings up a whole thing with artificial intelligence, right? So, so long as we continue to learn in different ways, there's always going to be diversity. You know, so long as we have something that is important to us that's different and we want to have that respected and recognized, there will always be cultural differences. I think for me that it's not a question of coming up with one general culture for everyone. It's more a question of becoming more sensitive to how other people make meaning. How do I make meaning? How do they make meaning? And how can I adjust, or how can I understand? How can we talk about what's going on? Because I think human beings are complex. I don't think we're simple. And so, because unless we become really simple, then
who knows,
then
right?
culture, if we become simple, then culture will be simple. But I don't think we are. You know, I really think we're interesting. We're really interesting human beings. So yeah. But I do see that there is a standardization, right? I mean, I think that you can, and that's okay. You know, there's expectations. So, you know, how is a, but it isn't. And you know, what is a coffee supposed to look like, or what is a cup of tea supposed to look like? I mean, will that be the same worldwide? I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
When I was in the States back in 2001 and 2011, so I married my wife back then, and we had our daughter and our son in the US, right? And we faced with a big question ourselves every day back then was, how are we going to raise our children? Are we raising our children in a Vietnamese culture way at home? Or are we gonna, you know, raise them in a different culture? And we look around the people in our community. A lot of Vietnamese, you know, like back then, I think not now. I'm not sure anymore. But back then, they refuse the background, the culture from Vietnam, so that it helped them easier to emerge and into the new culture in America. So it's easy to see, you know, like grandchildren came home and talk to grandparents in English that grandparents know nothing about. And I say, okay, what if one day that our grandchildren are going to grow up and talk to us in a language that we are not understanding about it anymore? So are we going to be happy about that? What role are we as the as a coach, as a gatekeeper for culture, as the one that can inspire people, that's motivate us to move to Asia and maybe help us to create a routine for the children when they grow up. At least they have to have some, foundation. That's what we wanted to do, right? And I look at the works that you do, and it links to something that 2 months ago my wife and I created. So uh, we are building a platform called sustainabilitymind.com. So that's a website. So we want to help people to build a mindset about sustainability, like culture. We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be lasting from, because this culture we have is beautiful, right?
Yeah.
It's beauty. And right now sustainability mind is not in definition anyway. One book they talk about a definition of sustainable is different than the next book and stuff like that. So from the work that you do, I see that linkage in terms of building the sustainability for future. So I want to ask you out of the blue, like this, how Almendra is defining a sustainability mind in her own word.
There's a piece in which I think the first step is to find out for yourself, what's important to you, what's valuable, and when you know that, how do you make sure that it continues to exist? And I think we're at right now. I genuinely feel that we're at a turning point in which we do need to have sustainability actually be a part of everything that we do. So I remember, when my children were born, I spoke to them in English here in Spain, and I didn't really celebrate, any sort of U.S. things until I had my children, and so I started doing celebrations of traditions from the United States or from my culture with them so that they could have that experience. And there was also almost like I want to call it like a discipline about it. There's sustainability requires discipline. And discipline means repetition, and it means practice. You cannot be sustainable if you're just sustainable for, like 30 minutes now, and then I kind of remember 2 weeks from now and I do it again. For me, sustainability has an element of practice and repetition. And so how do I build in practice and repetition into what I do so that whatever it is that I'm doing can be sustainable? So I guess if I think about sustainability and the work that I do, it's about continuously reflecting on what's important to me, why is it important, and how do I communicate that as well to other people? I think there's a sustainability also has a something with respect, no, with like self-respect, respect for others, respect for our interconnection. And so if I sort of listen to what's important and I keep repeating that, then I'm going to be able to sustain it over time. But I have to remind myself, I have to go into my values, what's important, and what would I be afraid of, or what would I feel sad of losing, so that I can remind myself that I don't want it to be lost, and so I can sustain it for the future.
Wow. And I think that discipline actually happened within the way that you got nurtured in the family also. Because I can catch up the word that when you and your father's sisters sat at the park bench, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you guys talk about culture. She told you that you are the third generation.
A third culture kid. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful for generation to to remind other people to explore the beauty of our culture. So we keep that curiosity flowing within us, right?
Yeah.
In this conversation, you mentioned how loving word is the word I think. Because my wife and I, we have the huge desire to help people to improve their ability to think. Because we
Mm,
think that our thinking is the beginning of all beautiful thing, all works
mm,
also. So if we can think well, then we can do well. When we do well, then hopefully the result will turn out well, right? So
mm.
and we vow to ourselves that we're gonna help people to improve their ability to think through conversation like this. We ask this big question for you, also Almendra, is how have you been growing your ability to think over the years?
Mm. Oh, I love that question also. Um, I challenge myself to imagine what else might be possible. And I challenge myself to come up with more questions than answers. The minute you have an answer, you're done. It's finished. There's an earth wisdom sentence or saying that goes, the first people had questions and they were free. The second people had answers and they became enslaved. And so the potential, the thinking, so if you keep thinking, the potential is that you're not going to you're not going to finish something. There's always going to be more possibility. And so what I have done over the years is I keep up coming up with ways to ask more questions about what I'm seeing. What else could there be here? Why did this happen? I use all of the, in English, all of the question words: who, what, where, why, when. What a question, and what am I not seeing? And what question can I ask myself to see something from a different perspective? And sometimes it's asking, what I'm curious now in terms of my thinking is, how are other people thinking? And how are they? So I'm now asking people about, so what are you thinking about this? Can you help me to see things from your way of thinking? So I'm trying to expand my thinking beyond my thinking. I'm trying to see, okay, so how do other people think, and how can I connect with that to think maybe even more widely, more collectively. That's my thinking process now.
Two last questions, okay? One is going to be a bizarre question, and the next one, so this bizarre question is like this. Because your parents back then could choose to, either stay in Spain or Italy, right? Your mom's side has a business of doing wine, so basically that she could be in France, Italy, and Spain also, right? Assuming that you were born in Italy and you grow up from Italy, what name do you think that they would name you?
I think it might have been something like Violeta or something like Violet, some name of a flower as well. I do think something like that. I don't know why I got Violeta, but there, I would be called Violeta.
Violetta. So that is how we're gonna secretly call each other from now on. Okay. Alrighty. I think it's just a taste of newness and for enjoyment of life. Every moment if we can think something new. And 4.5 years ago when we start this program, we never knew that we will be able to have the conversation with you, right? So that seed of newness sit there with us and help us to have this beautiful journey. And along the way, when I had conversation with amazing people who are successful, who helping other people to grow in life, we see inside of them that curiosity and that seed of newness is really, really strong. So a year ago, we sat down, we analyzed all of the conversations, right? We
Yeah.
ask, no, why people resist to change? Why change so hard for a lot of people, right? If we put a lot of money buying self-help books, we went to YouTube and TikToks and Facebook to learn a lot about change management, and companies spend a lot of money, training people about change. The next year, what? Guess what? Train again. The next year, train again. So what's missing in there? And we boldly came up with an idea that newness is something that can be embedded for people so that they will be able to take change from very proactive seat. So instead of sitting in the passenger
Mm-hmm.
seat, now you sit in the driver and having that mindset of newness every single day, doing something new with new people and having new questions asking, so to help you to expand your muscle of change. And from then, not only you get adapt to change, you're going to create change, right? So if I want to link that newness onto your world, how do you see it bring benefit into your world, Amendra?
How does newness tie in? It ties into creativity. It ties into to imagining something that didn't exist before and wanting to know more about it. For me, because I have worked in this field for so long, and there are these structures that, there's cultural patterns and they've been documented, and, certain countries have higher power distance than other, so, you can't just talk to your boss, but in other countries you can't. I mean, there's so many things that have been documented. So how do we make it new, right? So what's new to me is figuring out what no longer serves me. So out of all of these things that I know, what isn't useful, and learning more about that so that I can let it go and create something else. Because I think the problem with change is that we get comfortable where we are,
Mm.
and sometimes we settle for things that are actually uncomfortable, but it's comfortable because we've been in that for so long. And so the newness in the work that I do is, okay, now that you know all of this about yourself, what beliefs or what parts of your culture actually don't work for you anymore? And what what do you want to do about that? How do you want to bring something new to your life and let go of something that actually, my sense is that we have all the potential, and yet we stop ourselves. And sometimes we need to get rid of things to be able to have space to do something new. So I guess that's where I'm going with newness in my work. Get rid of things that no longer work for you, and then you'll have space for new things that do work for you. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So free our space for something else to come, and maybe that's something else will take us to somewhere else that's beautiful. Yeah, you're like your parents. They
Yeah.
took themselves out of New York all the way to Europe, and perhaps that's the a different world, different thinking, different living style, different everything. So
Yeah, and I sometimes wonder, about them. I'm like, how did they ever end up in this tiny little village in the south of Spain? It's like, how did those people, go places that they had never known about before? So that's what this is about. Let's go places that we never knew about before, either in our mind or physically or emotionally. Yeah, definitely.
then go to Vietnam.
Yes. I've written it down. It's in my journal now. So if I
Yeah.
write it, it happens.
Yeah, Amandra, thank you so much for spending your afternoon joining this conversation, sharing your stories, and a lot of insights and wisdom in here. And we love you. We love it a lot. And I really look forward to seeing you in person.
I love you too, and I love Vivian, and I think you are doing amazing work. And when I wake up in the morning after I sort of complete my little moment for myself as I read this morning. I usually see something that you have produced, and so I really enjoy having first thing in the morning your newness update. It's very special to me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yay! Have a beautiful, beautiful evening and say hello to your family for us. Okay?
I will. Thank you. I will tell them about you. Yes.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.